Are you too busy, too stressed out, unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Welcome to another episode of Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. I'm Diane Randall, your host. Today, I'm talking about making self-honoring choices versus following habitual patterns with my guest and friend of the show, Ishika Aswani. And she will share her insightful wisdom as to why it's imperative to be mindful of the habits we are constantly cultivating, because changing them can be a huge task, as almost all of us have experienced at some point or another. I'm so excited to introduce Ishika Aswani and dive into this wonderful conversation. Welcome, Ishika.
Hi, Diane. It's so nice to be back with you. Reconnecting.
It is so nice to be back with you, reconnecting, and just to hear what has transpired with you since I talked to you last year. Can you tell the listeners about who you are?
Who I am? That's quite the question. Okay, so, I live in Dubai, and what I do, I am a spiritual psychologist. And me and Diane, we met at the University of Santa Monica, where we did our master's in spiritual psychology.
I think that's awesome. And as we talk and unfold in this conversation, I'm sure they'll get some wonderful nuggets of what this conversation is about today, making self-honoring choices versus habitual patterns. If you could start there and really give us an idea of a framework of what that is.
Sure. What I would like to start talking about is my focus in life, and that's radiant health and well-being. And when I say radiant health and well-being, this just doesn't include physical health. I'm talking about psychological health, that's mental and emotional states of being, and financial states of being. So the focus being radiant health and well-being, and the topic that we're talking about being habits. What I've realized is that anything that we do repeatedly is really a ritual. It becomes a ritual, and any ritual that you repeat further becomes a habit. It becomes automatic and almost unconscious. And this is kind of how we learn how to walk, how to breathe, how to talk, we learn etiquette in this way, good posture, maintaining a good posture. So we learn all of these things like cycling and swimming and you name it through repetition, mainly instruction repetition. But what I've come to understand is that there are so many things that get ingrained in our ways of being on a daily basis that most of what we do is very, very automated. And there's nothing wrong in that. In fact, it's important to know how effective a tool repetition really is. A person's mentality is really your habitual thinking, the habitual thoughts that you think on a daily basis. Your attitude is your habitual feelings, the emotions that you feel. And your behavior is actually based on the two, your habitual thinking and your habitual feeling, your mentality and your attitude.
When you talk about attitude, Ishika, I had an interview a couple of weeks ago with a lady who has a show on being a female entrepreneur, and we got on the subject of life balance when you talk about attitude. And we were talking about being busy and balancing life. And she was talking about the attitude that people have when they take care of themselves, that they're being selfish. And I told her, or my response to her was that you're not being selfish, you're being self-honoring. So when you talk about the attitude and the feelings around that made me think about that.
So here's the thing. You mentioned an attitude of feeling selfish. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times one says it's all in the attitude. Mm-hmm. In other words, we may be doing things that are self-honoring to us, mm-hmm. but if we somehow believe that what we're doing is selfish and hence carry an attitude of guilt because of what we're doing for ourselves, then guilt is actually the predominant attitude. Mm-hmm. 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 And so what is initially a self-honoring choice may end up actually harming our state of well-being because of the guilt involved.
Because of the guilt in work, so we have...
Because of the guilt involved. Mm-hmm. Like, mm-hmm. So for example, I may decide that I want to go to the spa more than just once a month, for example. Maybe I decide to go. In fact, when I was traveling to LA every month for the 2 years, I decided to go to the spa every week when I was back home. Mm. And even though it was brilliant, it did tremendous good to my body at the time, because every time I'd come back from a 16-hour flight from a week away, and then with the time difference and the jet lag, and I'd just go into the spa and it would make me feel so relaxed. Mm-hmm. But this sense of feeling entitled, of being someone who got to go to the spa in the middle of the day, not once a month or not once a year, but actually once every week, initially carried a lot of judgment about that. Mm. And so more than the good, it might have actually been causing me harm up until the time that I realized that, and then I dropped the guilt and I realized that my lifestyle right now is just very unique for what it is, and my body knows what it needs, and I'm okay to go ahead with it.
So how does that factor in the habitual patterns?
So like I was saying, I just want to point out that habits are not, when people talk about habits, most times we just think about the physical habits that we have, or the physical mannerisms, or our body clock, for example. But really, habits are on every level of our being. Mm-hmm. We also have mental habits. We have thought patterns, or typical thoughts that we think every day, several times a day, whether we realize it or not. And similarly, certain thoughts or certain situations or certain people in our lives bring up for us certain ways of feeling about ourselves, about our situation or our lives. And so we get habituated to feeling a particular way about ourselves. So another example coming to mind, it's like, say at work, you have a manager who actually tends to give you constructive criticism at all times. And so it tends to be too critical, or you're receiving it in a critical way. Instantly, you may not feel on top of your game. It's like we can fall into a habitual way of feeling or a habitual way of thinking, and also a habitual pattern of behaving.
If I have a manager who's giving me constructive criticism all the time, I'm definitely going to feel a certain way about that.
Yes. And on the other hand, say you have a manager who's actually prizing you for all your initiative and your creativity, and the times that you did come to work on time, and the times that you did do a great job, automatically the feelings are different. And you automatically might feel more backed up, more supported in your role. So that's what I mean by attitude, habitual feelings, and habitual thinking has a lot to do with our habitual behavior.
Yes, it does. So why is it so imperative that we make self-honoring choices?
So for the busy professional, we already have so many tasks to get done in a day, so many people to cooperate with, and so many meetings or places to get to. And a habit, when we form a habit is an unconscious automatic response on all these different levels of our being. And a habit takes on an energy of its own, in my experience. when you get into the habit of doing something, it just gets done automatically. It's like getting a photocopy and saying I need like 20 copies of the same thing. So it's like boom, 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 you get 20 copies in one go.
Right.
So it has an energy of its own. And as far as that energy is generating your radiant health and well-being or supporting it and keeping you in it, it's great. But it's important to realize when habits start to sabotage our radiant health and well-being. When that energy starts to go against our natural flow or starts to block our own success or our own prosperity and us moving forward in any way in our lives. So really, this is about understanding, for me, it's about understanding the power in habits and rituals, how to create them, becoming very aware, first of all, of what are the different habits that I've actually fallen into over these last many years, some consciously, some not so consciously, and then deciding on which are the ones that I want to drop or change, and then how to do that.
Would you say that making the self-honoring choice kind of snaps us out of the habitual pattern that we may have so that we can make more conscious choices?
Very much so. Because for me, the way I've experienced making self-honoring choices, it has a lot to do with slowing down and discerning whether something is in my highest good. It also has to do with building an awareness of my thoughts, my feelings about something, and then letting my actions follow that. So it's kind of like realigning myself with how I truly feel about something, or realigning myself with an intuitive hit that I'm receiving, or realigning myself with my own radiant health and well-being when I realize that I've been going against the grain instead.
Wow, that's a very powerful awareness. What would you say to someone who's hearing this and wants to begin to understand their habitual patterns and at some point or start the process of making more self-honoring choices in a way that you've been able to experience?
So I would say the first key is just awareness alone. It's just becoming aware of the habits that we have. So this would require neutral observation, like just observing ourselves when we're going to work, or observing ourselves when something triggers an upset, observing ourselves when we're in the flow of our day to see what's going on with us. Of course, most of us are already very aware of certain habits that we're not proud of, habits that have taken on a life of their own.
Oh, yes.
And so that's a great place to start. The other thing that I would talk about is microscopic changes. And by that, the word in itself describes the subtlety of it. Microscopic, like literally tiny changes. So here's the thing with subtlety. Anything that's subtle, most of us, again, feel like it's not powerful enough, or things need to be drastic to make a difference. But that's not true in my experience. In my experience, it's the most subtle, the smallest steps and shifts that we make that really go the long distance, that bring about the genuine shifts and changes that are required. And so what I mean by microscopic changes, just to give you an example, is so for example, a person is working long hours and your job is mostly sedentary. You're at the desk in front of the computer, don't get very long a lunch break, and that's your lifestyle. And then say you want to change it up and you want to liven things up, feel lighter, get some exercise, be more active, and yet your lifestyle right now, the way it is and the way it's been for many years, doesn't allow it, because on weekends we have family and we have our chores and other things, and so it's not one thing, what would be drastic is to say, I'm going to take this gym membership, I'm going to sign up for a month, I'm going to go every day, when really your schedule and the way in which your body and your mind and everything has been right now is not, doesn't have the space for that. So that would be a drastic change to make and try and keep up to. Whereas a microscopic change might be something like, okay, well, I work on the 15th floor, so I'm going to take the elevator to the 14th, get off, and then just climb the flight of steps to the 15th floor. An intention goes a long way with this. So having the intention to become lighter, to feel energized, to oxygenate my cells as I do this, to tone my glutes and my thighs, to just make these muscles alive and awake right now.
What I hear you saying, and I'm just summarizing a little bit of what you said, is that your thoughts, your actions physically, mentally, emotionally have to be in alignment with the choices that you're making.
Yeah, it's got to be in alignment. And I've not experienced much value in taking a huge leap in a completely different direction all at once versus choosing microscopic steps one at a time to slowly shift the vessel. It's like, it's literally like we're on a liner in the sea and we're going in one direction. And then we suddenly decide that, okay, this is not the direction we need to be in. We want to take a left, or we want to actually turn around. The first step is actually to switch off the engine, and yet you don't end up turning the entire liner around in that one go. So you switch off the engine and every part of the machinery comes to a stop in time, and the liner becomes almost stationary, and then you start to use the rudder and you start to turn the whole thing around. So that's the bigger picture of any major, long-lasting, genuine shift and change we want to bring about in our lives. Because habits can catch up with us. Things that we've been thinking or feeling or acting out, not just over the last few weeks, but months, years, lifetimes, they can catch up with us. So there's no sense of getting militaristic about it. Rather being mindful and making the subtlest of changes, because these subtle changes bring about miraculous results in the long run.
So what do you say to someone who's listening and saying, I've tried, I take steps to change my life or change these habits that don't support me in my life, but I'm struggling?
So I would ask them what the struggle feels like, because many a times the habits that we pick up along the way tend to be coping mechanisms, and they could actually help us. They could have helped us in the moment or at the time in our lives when it helped us to cope with our situation. So most habits are usually coping mechanisms. So when we get to a point where we are aware that we're not actually coping anymore, or we don't want to be just coping anymore, we want to actually begin to thrive now. So this habit needs to go. When we come to that kind of awareness, many times what happens is it brings up stuff, brings up some mental emotional distress. It brings up stuff from that time that got us into the coping mechanism to begin with. And that's the stuff that's up to deal with. So it's important to actually deal with the deeper stuff, speak to a counselor, go into meditation, learn to get in touch with that part of ourselves to really deal with and work with those issues.
And it's so interesting that you say that. Every workshop, every participant, everyone that I work with, it doesn't matter what the conversation is, whether it's choices, food, self-care, life balance. I always start with dealing with the thoughts, the barriers, the limiting beliefs around whatever's coming up for you that is in the way of you making self-honoring choices, for example.
Yeah, that's imperative, because until we actually deal with what it was in the first place that drove us to the coping mechanism, what tends to happen is that we may drop this coping mechanism for now, but end up picking up another kind of coping mechanism in the deal, which may work in our favor for a while and then end up sabotaging our radiant health and well-being again.
Yes. And that's...
See, so for example, I mean, I don't know why this is coming to mind, but maybe someone who has a negative body image or has had a negative body image in the past and has been binging, for example, on food and other things. Maybe one of the ways to cope, to feel better about yourself would be to buy clothes that suit you, fit you well, style yourself in a way, groom yourself in a way that you start to feel better about yourself, which could really make a huge difference in uplifting this person's mentality and attitude about themselves and how they carry themselves. And as you see positive reinforcement from outside, you feel even more assured. And yet this is something that could go on to really breaking the person's bank balance. I mean, if they had to go on styling and grooming and focusing completely on externals. So this is just a wild example.
Yeah, I mean, it's so imperative because, as you know, I don't know about in Dubai, but in the American culture, for example, we get these messages, we get these signals from our external world, the media, our environment, that, you know, that we shouldn't feel good about ourselves because we're fat, you know, we're overweight, we don't work out. So I love what you said about...
Thank you. And I need to say one more thing. Mm-hmm. I think that self-improvement is completely overrated. Mm-hmm. This whole concept of self-improvement.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Which is exactly what you're talking about, which is what all of these external tabloids and whatever, all of this, the media and everybody says, like, oh, you know, in the name of self-improvement, you know, you want to have some constructive criticism in the name of self-improvement. You want to look at yourself again. You want to do these things. You want to shift stuff. And I honestly believe that self-improvement is overrated. This work is not about improving ourselves. It's about getting in touch with our true selves, making way for our inner selves to actually bloom, blossom, to come to the fore and to play in life.
Oh my God. It's so wonderful that you said that, because as I've evolved in the balance business, what I recognize in my work as well is that my intention is to help people with inner tools, just like you're saying, to work from the inside out in discovering who you really are at the core of your being. That's what I realize. I've recognized over time that the work is really about that, because there's a lot of self-improvement experts. And I'm going to tell you, initially that was big for me. I'm reading self-help books too, you know, self-development books too, trying to find my way. Okay. Yeah. But it's always about, when you do it that way, in my opinion, from the external world and external sources, it's always about the next workshop, the next book, you know, all these things that are about buying a product, buying something or getting something outside of yourselves, outside of yourself, and not necessarily learning that you have all you need inside. Absolutely. Everything you need, you have it. Absolutely. You have it within Absolutely. You.
And that's the difference, because I mean, we can read as many self-help books as we like, but like you're saying, the important thing is to be able to integrate what the self-help books are actually talking about. And that's been my experience even with all of the readings that we've done at USM. And you know how much those have been each year that we've been there.
Oh, yeah.
Over a dozen books. But the value that I received in doing that, in doing the work, like in going deeper in my own process and becoming aware of my own attitudes, my mentality, my behaviors, working with tools to shift and change and really center more into my radiant health and well-being. The books really helped at the time, because as I would release patterns and belief systems and older conditioning, it was helpful to read and understand and gain and kind of articulate inside myself the direction that I was moving in more and more. So those books I see as very important.
Yes.
And yet they go along with the inner work.
They go along with the inner work, and that is the key word, the work. You have to be ready to do the work. Yeah, the books are helpful. You read them, but the books are not the fix. The books are not the solution, like you said. It's the integrative work that must be done. Can you tell us about the work that you do in Dubai?
Well, so I counsel women on life. So some of my clients focus on their financial well-being, and there are clients who focus on their relationships. There are clients who like to focus on their body issues and their health and fitness. But all in all, the focus is on radiant health and well-being. And it's teaching the tools and techniques that we've learned with spiritual psychology. As you know, psychology has become the study of mind and behavior over the last many, many years.
Yes.
But really, originally, it was always meant to be the study of the soul. And as you know, spiritual psychology brings the two back in together and brings perspective to the whole study of our mind and behavior. And so that's the work that I do with people. Teaching them or sharing with them how to really go within and work their own process, become very aware of their mentalities, their attitudes, their behaviors, and honestly, to become very aware of how they really feel on the inside. Because at any point in time, we are living in two realities. One is our physical world reality, which is the external, which is me talking to you right now, the listeners listening to us, we writing emails, reading books, going to office. And then there's another reality that we're living in simultaneously, and that's our inner reality. It's how we experience everything that's actually going on the outside of us. And when our inner experience is not aligned with our outer experience or vice versa, that's where the conflict arises. That's where our whole life or living experience starts to feel conflicted, disturbed, out of alignment, messed up. And so the focus, again, is on radiant health and well-being, which is understanding your inner status, your inner state of being, your inner feelings, responses, your sense on things, and then aligning that with how you present yourself, or rather how you represent yourself in the world.
And breaking out of those habitual patterns and making more self-honoring choices that support your highest good.
Yeah.
That's just so awesome.
Yeah. So it's mainly making your habits work for you. So like I said in the beginning, anything that we repeat, any action, thought, or feeling that we allow to repeat becomes a ritual. And any ritual that we keep on repeating further becomes an unconscious automatic response, a habit. And then the habit takes on a life of its own. And so it's so important to just start becoming very aware of the habits that we've cultivated with ourselves on the physical level, on the mental level, emotionally, the different experiences that we have all through our day. And really use the tool of repetition in our favor. So it's actually simple to break a habit. It's actually very simple to break a habit. The key is awareness of the habit and the discernment that it's something that's actually now beginning to sabotage your radiant health and well-being. So you've decided clearly that this is not something you want to continue with. So these two are key. And then simply replacing it with a self-honoring ritual, with a self-honoring choice, and then repeating it. It just takes conscious repetition to begin with. That's it. It's like, for people who are used to waking up later in the day, and you realize somehow that, you want to change your body rhythm and you want to actually wake up at 7 or 6 in the morning so that you could get in some morning exercise or go to the beach or, have a coffee with your spouse or before going into work or whatever it is. It only takes, the awareness of the benefits of wanting to do that, the discernment of what is that shift you want to make, and then just conscious repetition for a while until it just becomes the new habit. But it's the loving patience that's key as well in this process. It's having loving patience and not becoming militaristic with ourselves. Because becoming militaristic with yourself will only produce self-loathing, self-hate, self-avoidance. Whereas any mindful ritual or habit that you want to imbibe now for your own radiant health and well-being is and will be the most loving thing that you can do for yourself. It's actually a way to start loving yourself more and more, literally becoming in love with yourself. One ritual or one self-honoring choice at a time.
I love that. I have chills. You have certainly given us insight to start to make better choices and making our habitual patterns our friend, as well as making self-honoring choices. And I want to thank you for your insight and wisdom in sharing what all that means today.
Oh, you're so welcome.
I know you always have inspired me, not only in your work and in your wisdom, but also in your actions. The 2 years, I always admired, and I think I've shared this with you before, what does it take for someone to fly 18 hours from Dubai to USM? And I think I shared with you when I was working in Germany for a while.
Yeah.
That experience you had basically gave me the courage, or inspired me in a way where I had the courage to go from Frankfurt to USM. To LA. So I've always admired your
this third year was amazing.
Oh wow.
And talking about habits, it's so interesting that so as you know, for all of these years we've had the class on one specific weekend every month. So this last year I was attending class on the third weekend of every month. And believe it or not, 2 days before I would travel, I would actually start to feel the effects of jet lag, where my body clock would actually start adjusting to the 11 or the 12-hour time difference.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not. So talk about habits and just getting habituated to getting on that plane once a month and going off to another time zone that's 12 hours away. My body actually adjusted itself. So repetition is all that it takes. It didn't need to. Sure, there was an intention. As I said, intentions are super powerful. And so my intention was to complete what I began 5 years ago.
Right.
And so my intention was to do this gracefully and with ease. But my body it was just the repetition of it. My body just knew, and it would just adjust itself.
And it sounds like not only were you in the program, you were also getting the experience or having the experience of integrating what you were learning.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
That's what life is all about.
It really is. And if people want to learn more about you, how can they get in touch with you? What is your website, or what is your means of contact?
Okay, well, they can write me an email. My email is yasna@tobebliss.com. You could mention that on the page.
It will definitely be in the show notes. Everything.
Yeah. Great. And then I do have a Facebook page as well, which is called To Be Blissful. And currently I am in the process of having a website as well, finally. So that would be coming in shortly. And I do counseling sessions on Skype, and my clients are from different parts of the world, not just Dubai, but they're from France, from the UK, from Singapore, from India and Pakistan. So I'm open to that. Email is the best way to contact me for details on sessions.
And for anyone that's listening out there that wants to know more about Ishika, her information will be in the show notes for this episode. Ishika, I want to really thank you from my heart for being a guest on Balanced Living for Busy Professionals today.
It's my pleasure, Diane.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.